You're watching Going Underground with me, Afshin Rattansi. Coming up in the show, imprisonment without trial, rendition, torture and domestic spying haven't been enough to stop the threat to Britain from ISIS. Should the next step be for the government to be able to take away our passports without a trial? And have we returned to austerity not seen since the Great Depression? We speak to a 91-year-old war veteran who believes that the world his generation built for us is falling down. Plus, why is the Philanthropist of the Year's foundation under investigation? All this and more on today's Going Underground. Even before President Obama's speech on Wednesday, our government was debating the confiscation of passports from UK subjects in our battle with ISIS. Debating passports over at the State Department, meanwhile, goes something like this.
There's some on the Hill who make the argument that simply traveling, for an American citizen to travel to Syria right now, should be enough to either, one, revoke their passport, or two...
Just for someone traveling to Syria? Well, that's an interesting way of reading United States law and the Constitution in terms of passports and citizenship.
No. I think that they're suggesting that maybe it should be written in. You know, the Brits have announced their plans to step up their procedure.
So in America, there's a constitution to protect citizens. But what's the situation over here? With me is the former Solicitor General and MP for Harborough, not the former MP for Harborough, Sir Edward Garnier. Sir Edward Garnier, welcome to Going Underground. It's very rare for you to make a criticism of the Conservative government or coalition. Why have you chosen to make one about the response to ISIS?
I don't think I've been making a criticism. I've simply been urging people not to pass unnecessary laws or, in producing more laws, replicating laws that we have already. I think I've urged common sense and caution, and certainly when the Prime Minister responded to my question in the Chamber of the House of Commons last week, I think he rather agreed with me.
He did reflect what you were saying and reflect on it, but then you couldn't escape from the entire commentariat and I don't know how many other rogue MPs saying, no, we have to do something now and we have to render people stateless.
There's always a great desire in the commentariat and amongst some members of Parliament to ensure that their voice is heard and to be seen to be demanding that something is done. I'm all very, I don't mind about things being done so long as what we do is sensible, doesn't replicate what we can do already, and doesn't lead us to further problems and doesn't deal with the questions that we need to answer.
Well, what does it say about the level of debate in this country if when the question was raised in the State Department in Washington, it was batted away by one of Obama's spokespeople saying, no, there's the Constitution. In a way, you were saying it here, there's our legal obligations under conventions that Britain has signed. Why don't we have that level of political debate here?
We don't have the same sort of spokespeople as the American system does. We have a lobby system, and lobby journalists who are accredited to the Parliamentary lobby system or the number 10 lobby system go to private off-the-record briefings in number 10, whereas in the United States they stand out there in front of the cameras and they get asked questions directly and they answer them directly. It may well be, we don't know. I'm not a member of the number 10 staff, nor am I a lobby journalist. We don't know whether the people back in number 10 in responding to such questions answered as directly as the American person did. But there's absolutely no doubt that we cannot remove British citizenship from people who are only British. We can do other things. We can remove the British citizenship of people who have a dual nationality with another country, and we can take people's passports off them if they're British as they attempt to leave the country. But removing the passport is not removing someone's citizenship. You can't destroy someone's nationality by taking away their passport.
Maybe it was people speaking out of turn then, but in the sense that they knew that the public wanted something to be done. Is it the idea of something must be done?
Well, the public, of course, wants something to be done. And one of the things they want to be done is for terrorists not to come here, either foreign or British terrorists, to come back here and do disobliging things to us. And the government's duty is to make sure that we are kept safe in our beds. But if British citizens go abroad to Syria or to northern Iraq, join up with ISIS and get trained to do terrible things there, and they get killed, well, I'm afraid most of us in this country would say, well, bad luck and good riddance. If you want to go out there and do something stupid, that's entirely up to you, but don't expect any sympathy from the rest of us. If those people then want to come back because they don't find it quite so comfortable out there, or they've been misled about what ISIS is doing and the things that they have been encouraged to do in that theatre are no longer quite so attractive, and they want to come back, well, then they need to surrender to the law. But they cannot expect to be, it seems to me, praised or lauded for going out and then coming back, and then expect not to avoid the clutches of our justice system. Ideally, we need to prosecute on evidence people who commit offences against the law of England. And when they come back here, we should, if we can, prosecute and try them and send them to prison if they're guilty.
You mentioned encouragement. Would they perhaps argue that they were encouraged by David Cameron?
Do you remember the Prime Minister lost the vote last September when Parliament was recalled? A number of the people who are seduced into going abroad to fight for ISIL no doubt think they're going over there to either to fight against the Syrian government, the Assad regime, or to do humanitarian work. And they find when they get there that actually they're fighting each other. They are fighting other anti-Assad people. And I think they find it confusing.
But didn't the encouragement come from Downing Street? Because so committed was David Cameron to the cause of the rebels that he was willing to have our services support them.
Well, I think he was very keen that we should do something to assist in the undermining of the Assad regime. I think that's probably not controversial. But where I think the pause has been helpful is that those who have gone over there have discovered that actually the simplistic "my enemy's enemy is my friend" doesn't work. There is not just a three-dimensional, but a sort of 4 or 5 or 6-dimensional game of chess going on over there. And there are some very, very unpredictable people. I've described some of these people as psychopaths. The people who are killing journalists and posting those executions on video, on YouTube or wherever it may be, are, it seems to me, ill.
Albeit the mental illness, as an analogy, can sometimes be dangerous.
No, I'm not making any. But I mean, they are clearly disturbed people, and I would certainly caution any British subject, British citizen, thinking of going over there and thinking they're going to do something humanitarian or going to bring down the Assad regime, to think extremely carefully about what they're doing.
I think many people would just not try and encourage them, discourage them actively from doing so. Although, funny enough, it raises a point then. If you were one of their lawyers, would you say in mitigation that it was the Cameron government that made them, inspired them to go off and fight
No, I wouldn't.
the evil dictator of Syria?
No, I wouldn't, because there are, that lawyer would know, wouldn't he, that it is against the law to go abroad to commit acts of terrorism, to go abroad to be trained to commit acts of terrorism, so
whatever the case, and whoever the opponent is. Boris Johnson, of course, Mayor of London, willing to throw away the right, seemingly, to innocent until proven guilty. Anyone going to Syria or Iraq
must be presumed to be.
What do you think of that?
Not much.
From your legal viewpoint?
Not much. Boris is a highly intelligent politician, and his job is to make sure that people understand what he's about, and he has a message to give that he's a front-rank British politician. But in relation to that particular detail, I think he was wrong. In this country, you are innocent until you are proved guilty.
But why do politicians increasingly make these kinds of outlandish statements to the media, and how does that impoverish general political debate then in the country?
It's not a new thing. Politicians are in the business of catching the public's eye.
But you identified things that would make what Britain did illegal.
Yeah, but I'm a boring lawyer. I happen also to be a member of Parliament.
Legality being important, though.
The rule of law is vital, and our civilised democracy doesn't work without it. But that doesn't mean to say that colourful people cannot get up and say eye-catching things. You gain attention for what you're trying to say, sometimes by being outlandish. I have to temper my remarks and what my ambitions are for my country so that they coincide with the rule of law. Others, perhaps less tutored in the legal world, can get ahead of themselves and then just have to row back a little more quietly.
But do you think the government then spends more time thinking about these populist slogans, regardless of the legal constraints, and less time on foreign policy. I mean, it has to be admitted that there is no doubt. I mean, your leader wanted Britain to get involved in a war in Syria on the side of ISIS.
The thing that I think is clear to me is that you have a number of ambitions as a politician, as a leader of a country. It doesn't matter whether it's the United Kingdom or anywhere else. And you have to do your best to achieve what you think is best for your country. And in order to do that, you have to get there onto the front. You have to attract public attention. There's no point sitting in a cupboard talking to yourself. He has to get out there and lead the country. And it was quite clear that last year, bear in mind, Assad is not a nice guy. He is someone who has used chemical war
yes, but
weapons
fighting with
against...
ISIS is a bit of
Well, he was fighting with the... he wanted to encourage and to assist...
moderate Islamists.
Yes. And such people do exist. No, of course there are moderate Islamists. There are...
well, as we now know, so many of those people joined Jabhat al-Nusra and all these other groups, so it was a lot more complicated.
Yes, well, life is a lot more complicated. But unfortunately, if you are addressing a country in a short soundbite, you don't have time to say, but on one hand, on the other. My message, he would say, is that we need to do this. The safety of our country is in danger, so we need to do that. And then it's for the Attorney General, the Solicitor General, and the lawyers within the government legal service, both within the Home Departments and also the Foreign Departments, to ensure that the perfectly sensible aim of the government, of the political government, is tempered to fit within our international and domestic legal obligations.
Edward Garnier, thank you very much.
Not at all.
Some of you are probably shocked by Tony Blair being voted 2014's Philanthropist of the Year by a well-known men's magazine. Was it a publicity stunt by GQ? Who knows? But now the Middle East peace envoy has a problem that will disconcert him more than the thousands killed in Gaza, maybe. It's arguably even worse for him than his fear of citizens' arrest, for those alleging he's a war criminal over Iraq. The Tony Blair Faith Foundation is under investigation. The Charity Commission has confirmed that it is to meet representatives from the foundation. This comes after a former employee said the foundation spent an inordinate amount of time seemingly protecting the former Prime Minister's image. Somehow the Charity Commission, which is run by a former BBC manager, is keen to stress that no regulatory issues have been identified. If the foundation is ever found to just be a PR spin machine for Tony Blair, maybe he can just get Alistair Campbell back to help him out. After all, he did such a good job selling Blair's interventions around the globe. Coming up in part 2 of Going Underground, is there a recovery? We see Britain through the eyes of a World War II veteran who compares today's austerity with the Great Depression of the 1930s. And who got paid handsomely to ruin your holiday if you were lucky enough to book one, or because you didn't have a passport to go to the beach. All this and more after a short break. Panic stations, as if to prove those Scots supporting the Yes campaign in Thursday's independence referendum right. PMQs were not PMQs this week. Cameron, Miliband and Clegg all went north of the border and left sacked Foreign Secretary William Hague and Tony Blair's First Minister for Women to fight it out at the dispatch box. More of their fight after this question, though, from Labour MP Barry Gardiner.
At the end of last month, my constituent, Mr. Krishna Upadhyaya, was disappeared in Qatar. He had been arrested by the Secret Service there because he was investigating the human rights abuses of workers who were working to build the infrastructure for the 22 World Cup. And I thank the Foreign Office for their help in securing his release. But what action will he take to speak to the ambassador of Qatar about the disgrace of arresting him in the first place and about the treatment of those who are preparing those facilities?
Not sure whether you saw former Foreign Secretary Jack Straw, an ally of Qatar, shuffling his papers behind him. Anyway, what could Haig have to say about Qatar, which has been alleged to be backing ISIS in Iraq and Syria?
I know that the Embassy and the Foreign Office will want to follow up these matters. That is for my successor, the Foreign Secretary, to determine.
Good get out, Mr. Haig, since you used to hang out with the Prime Minister of Qatar when you were the Foreign Secretary backing ISIS in Syria with these people. Haig wasn't much better when he answered this question from an MP from the north of Ireland.
The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership leaves the health service vulnerable to some of the worst possible outcomes of this government's privatisation programme. Private investors will be able to hold the government and devolved administrations through the Investor-State Dispute Settlement Tribunal. In that respect, how can the Leader of the House guarantee that the health service, including the health services in the devolved administrations, will be exempt from TTIP?
Haig supports TTIP, so he pushed the urgent NHS question away. But what about the real battle of ideas at the dispatch box this week?
We want Scotland to stay.
I do agree with the Right Honourable Lady.
I thank the Right Honourable Member for the words that he said.
The great strength of the United Kingdom is that it is not a rigid union.
We want the UK to stick together in the cause of social justice.
Well, the Right Honourable Lady makes a powerful point about solidarity.
We must stay as family, not become foreigners to each other.
The Right Honourable Lady puts it extremely well.
Very well indeed. This week, the head of the TUC compared the government's attitude to the country to something out of Downton Abbey. One critic of television dramas like Downton is a 91-year-old veteran of World War II who grew up in the Great Depression. A question he asks repeatedly in a new book is whether Labour and Tory politicians have simply forgotten our country's history. With me is the author of Harry's Last Stand, How the World My Generation Built is Falling Down and What We Can Do to Save It. Welcome, Harry, to Going Underground. Let's begin with you being a survivor of the Great Depression and what that tells you about austerity now in Britain today.
If I told you the actual truth, you would be aghast, because I started work at the age of 7, pushing a large cart filled with beer cases and selling it to the poor around the neighbourhood where I lived. And only because my family was so desperate, they couldn't afford food. I would go to school hungry most mornings. And my sister and I eventually wound up going behind restaurants and digging through their kips of hoping that maybe someone had left a bit of food behind. It was actually unbelievably horrendous. You can imagine, eventually they started providing a very small glass of milk for us, and how happy we were to trudge to school knowing that we would have that to fill our bellies. And of course, there was no work for men. Everything was shut down. And my father particularly, who was injured in the mines and retired with a big pension of 10 shillings a week, which barely paid the rent, and that's about it, you know. So
But you compare that and the conditions then with the conditions now. You're saying
Yes.
that
Well,
what you fought for in the Second World War, it's that austerity coming back.
I feel it heading that way, because the government seem to feel that austerity is the only way to resurrect a good standard of living. And it certainly isn't, because it's just making more and more poor people. But it's frightening, actually, and I don't know what the answer is. Quite frankly, I'm not a politician, but I am a historian. In my book, I've tried to describe to people what it was like and how it could be again unless we put up a guard against it. There's a 10% in the country today, in our countries today, who are not concerned about, say, the masses. It's a reverted pyramid, actually, the top leading down to the very bottom of this pyramid, which are the absolute poor.
At that time, I mean, one of your siblings had died of tuberculosis. I mean, it's a story of utter deprivation, but there were glimmers of light in the National Health Service and the Attlee government and the 1945 Labour government.
Oh yes, later on in life, but during the dark periods, you couldn't afford to go to a doctor. I never saw a doctor until I was 18, and it was only after the war that we brought in the National Health Service. But
and how do you see that now? The cuts and the privatisation to the NHS.
I think it's privatisation. I'm appalled that they even think about it, because the national health is the saving grace of all of us. I know what it's like to be ill and not be able to get a doctor to see yourself or one of your family. It was very, very frightening.
Now, another aspect to this, actually the Trade Union Congress mentioned this week, Downton Abbey you mention in the book. How do you see it now? I mean, it's better now, obviously, the housing conditions, the job situation. Isn't it better now?
No, I don't think it is, quite frankly. I think it's appalling, the housing situation. I think it's dreadful that the young people cannot even dream of owning their own home anymore. It's what makes a family, makes life. To be able to walk in your own door and close the door and think, it's good to be home. Have a little bit of garden where you can potter around, you know. It's not much to ask for. But unfortunately, I think building has been handed over to companies which work for the government and also for the wealthy.
You blame it on the city, as it were, that the government is just for the city and these elites.
Oh, yeah.
What about food banks? Things are better there, obviously, than the Great Depression.
They shouldn't be necessary, though, should they? I mean, when you think of the thousands and thousands of people who are rushing to food banks every week to survive, that indicates that work has become impossible to find. Because, let's face it, no one wants to rely upon handouts. They want to work. They want to feel that they have a purpose in life.
You fought for this country in the Second World War. We hear from British politicians quite often, there's a new Hitler. How is history being rewritten of your time, and how is it getting us into trouble?
I don't know what they mean by a new Hitler. I think politicians, I feel we don't have a government for the people, by the people anymore. It's run by industrialists, and the members of Parliament are merely puppets to them. They're told what they have to do and what's going to be done. It may sound silly, but this is my thought.
But you still favour democracy.
Oh,
you mentioned two people in here, don't you?
Yeah, because someone's trying to break it down, it doesn't mean to say that democracy is not workable. But we have to make sure it is a democracy and not someone in the top echelon who is trying to work their system under the name of democracy.
So how do you feel about the British soldiers that went into Iraq, that may be going back into Iraq, we don't know, in case there's another war about to start, and what happened in Afghanistan. How did you view that as a veteran?
Well, right from the start, I thought it was the biggest mistake that was ever made by America and Britain, that they went along with the American Bush, because it was obviously a put-up thing. They were interested more in oil than in rescuing the Iraqi people. So that it's every move that's been made in the last few years seems to be for wealth, for oil, for anywhere the industrialists see a possible place where they can go and increase their wealth, they will go irregardless of the suffering of the place that they arrive in. If we hadn't have gone into Iraq, I'm sure the Iraqis would still be oppressed by their leader, but at least they were alive, much more so than since we were there.
Harry Leslie Smith, thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
For those of you lucky enough to book holidays abroad, did any of you end up going nowhere because you couldn't renew your passport in time? Well, you and thousands of other holidaymakers won't be too happy to know that staff at the passport office actually got rewarded for your misery. It turns out that Theresa May's Home Office staff have actually received bonuses of nearly £700,000 during their chaotic summer shifts. Perhaps they were rewarded for the fact that the backlog of hopeful applications reached 500,000 at one point. Some of them received up to £5,000. The bonuses were all paid just a few months after David Cameron and Theresa May both had to apologise in the House of Commons over the whole passport fiasco. And where is this cash coming from? It might have something to do with the £13 profit the passport office is making on each application. That's it for today's show. Join us on Monday when we will be speaking to Shantha David from Unison about David Cameron's plans to break the power of unions. Don't forget, you can drop us a line on Twitter at underground_RT, like our page on Facebook, or email us on goingunderground@rttv.co.uk. See you on Monday.